Welcome to our new series Work On with Nature, beginning with the first lecture, What are the Laws of Nature? It certainly hasn't always been this way, but lately nature has been in the news almost daily. And as is often the case with news, those reports are unfortunately not so very positive. In fact, a growing number of people are worried about nature and the climate. And how could it be otherwise with all the reports worldwide about floods, heat, heavy storms, drought, forest fires and record temperatures? We refuse to look on despondently and may even want to rise up, to force something. Because the fact is now beyond dispute that we humans have an impact on the climate. And we are also trying to do more and more about it. Drive electric cars, install solar panels, eat vegetarian food, separate waste, stop flying so much, etc. But for many people it feels like a mere drop in the ocean. Is this really helping, and isn't more or perhaps something completely different needed? There is also a realization that the problem lies deeper than this. If we want to live more in harmony with nature, more is also called for than just fighting symptoms. In this series, we approach the issue from the universal wisdom or Theosophical. In doing so, we want to show that there is no reason for despondency, because there is always something that each of us can do, but something that requires a different perspective on nature. For what is nature really according to ancient universal wisdom or Theosophical? Do we know how nature works? How do outer nature and inner nature relate to each other? And what place do we as humans have in nature? What is our function actually, seen from the perspective of nature as a whole? And what does knowledge of the circulations in nature or on our earth mean for migration, for example? In the next two lectures and studies we want to show that working on with nature is always possible and open to all of us. And we start from as universal a view as possible. And at the end of each lecture in this series we will make it specific and go from abstract to concrete. How can you work on with nature? When you think of a universal view of nature and how nature works, you quickly come to the concept of natural laws. Hence we start this first lecture with this topic, what are the laws of nature? We will answer this question using a number of sub-questions. First, naturally, what is nature? Is it governed, and if so, who or what governs it? Second then, what are laws and how do they work? To what extent do they govern? And can we influence them? And finally the question, what then does it mean to work on with nature and her laws? Maybe saying work on with nature is a somewhat strange way of phrasing, but these are the words that Madame Blavatsky used in her beautiful book The Voice of the Silence, where she writes the advice, help nature and work on with her, and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. That we have the potential to be a creator in nature, and what we mean by that will hopefully be clear by the end of this series. By the way, we write nature and laws with capital letters for a reason. Because we assume that they mean more than just external nature and laws. But we will come to that. The lecture has 3 parts, and each part will focus on one of these questions. And as you're used to, after each part there will be a short break, and you can ask your questions via YouTube chat or by emailing to questions@blavatskyhouse.org. Apart from these 3 questions, to start with the concept of the laws of nature, you can already ask the following question: is there order in nature at all? And are there laws? Let's consider that first. Now you can undeniably recognize a certain regularity in nature. Just if we look at everyday life, we can pretty much predict the following day. We will no doubt wake up again in the same bed we went to sleep on which we remained thanks to gravity. We know to some extent what a day looks like. We know how long a day lasts, how long it stays daylit, that the seasons will not change overnight, and we also know to some extent how we should dress based on the previous evening's weather forecast. In the small, we can to some extent study the building blocks of which nature is composed and how they behave. We know what cells our bodies are made of, how they divide, and have discovered all kinds of regularities in them as well. We know more and more about what influence sleep has, or movement, and which foods can cause which effects, positive or negative. If we zoom out further, we have to come to understand the cosmos around us better and better. We understand when a planet or star is on the horizon and where it is in respect to the Earth at what time. And we can even use the known laws of nature in our solar system to calculate exactly how to land a probe on a comet moving through space at tremendous speed, millions of miles from Earth. All kinds of scientists like physicists, biologists or physicians are increasingly trying to discover the laws both in the micro and macrocosm by measuring the observed phenomena, recognizing patterns, identifying cause and effect relationships, etc. Moreover, cosmos in Greek originally also means order, and no doubt that word was deliberately chosen. So we can discover quite a lot of order and laws in the physical world, based on what we can measure with all kinds of instruments. But there's not only order in external matters. There are also all kinds of patterns in the behavior of living things in nature, of plants, animals and humans alike. For example, how we respond to a threat or an opportunity for food. Looking at humans, we recognize in ourselves that we build all kinds of habits. Much of what we do in a day is on repeat. We have our work, our recurring appointments, we usually eat and sleep at set times. And we also usually repeat who we see and how we interact with each other. When we approach someone in a certain way, friendly or unfriendly, it affects how that other person responds to us. We mirror each other's behavior and build up patterns in that too. And in larger groups of people, you can also recognize social patterns. There are the cultural patterns in whole countries or peoples, a certain way of dealing with each other. And furthermore, you see, for example, cyclical patterns in history, such as the rise and fall of civilizations or economies. In short, even beyond the physical level, there is some form of order or law. From the perspective of Theosophia, order exists throughout nature. And that is probably already clear to those who have followed the previous series on karma or cause and effect. Only we do not say that there is order because of something external, but that it originates from within, based on the free will inherent in all beings, in which we take life to be much broader than is commonly thought. We conclude this on the basis of a limited number of principles that we will now explain. Theosophia stands on three basic principles. In short, boundlessness, cyclicity, and the fundamental identity of all life. The first principle, boundlessness, is also described as an omnipresent, eternal, boundless and immutable principle. And when this manifests as the one life. It means that there is always, behind everything and everyone, a force operating everywhere. The underlying force behind everything that manifests and that you can call the one life. So in essence, we too are that force, that one life, not as we think we are, but at our core, at the heart of our being. In essence, we are boundless. But why then does everything appear and disappear when we look around us? This is answered by the second principle of cyclicity. The one life is boundless, infinite and unchanging, but its manifestations are like a coming and going, an appearance and disappearance of universes, as it is described. It is like ebb and flow, day and night, and the coming and going of the seasons. But in essence, all cyclical phenomena, including a human life, are a product of the sparks of eternity, essentially boundless focus points through which the one life flows. We also call these the monads, the eternal pilgrims or centers of consciousness. And each of these monads, or souls with a capital letter as stated in the third principle, is therefore equal to any other. It is the fundamental identity of all life. All monads are essentially boundless. Each is an expression of this boundless one life. And each monad has the same potency as the most developed of these, within which we have our existence at a given time, and which you can call the universal oversoul, as the philosopher Emerson also did. So not a supreme God or ultimate boss, but a being within whose sphere we evolve until we reach the level of that being itself, and then evolve again in an even wider hierarchy of consciousness in the boundless. For this principle is also about identity or development or evolution. Each being evolves independently from free will, but always in connection with other beings. Hence, the third principle also mentions cyclic and karmic law. Just as you have to sow in one season to reap in another, we also evolve according to the cycles of, for example, the earth and the sun. And we do this on the basis of cause and effect or karma. Our actions, based on free will, have an effect on the whole. We can move this whole forward, working on with nature, or going with the flow, as we sometimes say. Or we can act against the whole, or against nature, and will also then experience the countercurrent. And then we immediately come to the concept of nature, which we can now better define from these three principles. From these three principles of Theosophia, all of nature is in fact inspirited. Everything is alive, from atom to star. Nature itself, according to Theosophia, can therefore be seen as one fast, living, inspirited organism. It is a cosmic being, whether we are talking about our planet Earth, our solar system, the Milky Way galaxy, or even a group of galaxies. And within such an organic entity, every atom is connected to every other atom, whether near or far. The whole is like an aggregate of beings interblending and acting and interacting upon each other. And every being, every atom or monad, be it an atom of life, a human being, a planet, sun or star, is thus inseparable from the mother nature of which it is an integral part. Just as every atom or cell in our body is also inseparable from us. So the conclusion is that everything is inseparably connected. Yes, actually, essentially one with everything else. And so, when we speak of nature, we are not just talking about the external side, with what we recognize as atoms, cells, minerals, plants, animals, humans, planets or stars. The beings perceptible with our senses are only a really small cross-section of infinity. Most of nature is actually invisible. Just as we humans are much more than our bodies, the same applies to every living being. The body is merely a vehicle in which a being learns its lessons, a temporary home of the soul that expresses in it, life after life, more and more of its innermost spiritual or mental core. We also claim to know a person not so much when we know his or her appearance, but when we are familiar with his or her character, something that is not visible on the outside. But we all know that it is mainly this invisible inner world that determines what is expressed outwardly in behavior, in actions and in words. If you are looking forward to something, for example, it is as if the sun is shining while it is raining outside. You just radiate that. And the fact that you are looking forward to something is usually also because you have been working on it for some time, because it aligns with your values, the ideals that you have, something that gives your life meaning. These are all inner processes on an invisible plane, so to speak, which at a given moment are expressed in the outer plane of existence. So it is no different with nature. The cosmic, living organism that we are part of and have our existence in is also composed of invisible and visible planes of existence. Nature is composed of countless of these spheres that permeate each other. We would therefore limit ourselves by thinking that what you cannot perceive does not exist. That there are all kinds of spheres or planes or realms, also invisible, that permeate each other, has now also been scientifically accepted. Think, for instance, of radio waves, forms of radiation, etc. Before we could perceive it, it was already there. It is therefore also much more logical, we think, to suppose that there is an infinity of vibrations and frequencies of which we perceive only a really small part. Now nature, like any living being, like ourselves, is dual. There is a more conscious and inner side that actively governs, and a passive, unconscious side of nature that is more following. For example, all kinds of processes in our bodies are passive and unconscious. Think of our circulatory system, breathing, digestive cycle, etc. We don't have to consciously think about this, it just happens more or less automatically. Furthermore, there is a hierarchical, cooperative relationship between these planes or realms. When we engage in active and conscious activity, we exercise, for example, these passive processes move with us. And the same applies to other conscious choices we make. If we slowly but surely start eating less and less to maybe no more meat at all, for example, or if we consciously get other ideals, actively start thinking other thoughts, then this ultimately results in our body changing and the processes in it as well. And this also applies in the larger picture. The way people interact with nature in recent centuries has become more and more like a kind of disposable object. We see the earth primarily as a big lump of matter from which we can extract resources without worrying about the impact or taking care of natural restoration or regeneration. We dig canals, build dams, cut down forests, etc., with consequences for all kinds of ecosystems. And in the bioindustry, for example, animals have become mass products, where we take on the risk of animal diseases, including the risk of epidemics or even pandemics, if the diseases spread from animals to humans. Now this is all a result of very limited thinking, of a narrow-minded mentality, also on an invisible realm, but the disharmony of which is becoming increasingly visible in the physical realm. Fortunately, in the invisible realm of thought, there's more and more knowledge about and attention for ecosystems and nature in general, which also enables us to restore this harmony, some of the disharmony. Consider, for example, the now famous video How Wolves Change Rivers. And by reintroducing the wolf in Yellowstone Park, an ecosystem was able to recover completely, even to the point of changing the course of the river. Or consider how indigenous peoples interact with nature. There are examples of them returning to areas devastated by industry and making them flourish again within a few years. So what takes place in the invisible, in our mentality, in our thinking, expresses itself in the visible world. Ideas rule the world, as Plato put it. But it does not mean that these are always equally harmonious influences, as we have already seen. And this is mainly because in the mental realm, we humans hardly allow ourselves to be nourished by another invisible realm above the mental realm, namely the spiritual. In the second part of this lecture and in the coming lecture we will discuss this further. Now, in our rather materialistic society, the attitude has long been what you don't see doesn't exist. And if you limit yourself to what you can perceive, you are shortchanging reality. If you are not open to an underlying force behind physical reality, then you are also constantly surprised by certain consequences of things you have not seen or taken in. But it is becoming increasingly clear that in doing so, we are also shortchanging ourselves. Consider the effects of using fossil fuels, microplastics or fertilizers. The consequences are sometimes not apparent until later. Or worse, they only come to light later because they have been covered up. But we are slowly but surely seeing more and more that a new mindset is forming. For assuming a spiritual nature is in fact nothing but logical thinking, but from a completely different starting point. Instead of seeing the earth as a floating lump of dead matter, you then assume that on a spiritual level nature is one inspirited living entity. Moreover, this is a very old and familiar thought, found in the origins of every worldly wisdom and still lived by in many ancient cultures, and which also opens us to influences from the underlying spiritual nature. But we can only recognize these if we are open to them and actively engage with them. But if those spiritual areas are governing order and the laws of nature, this leads, of course, to the question, who or what then determines this order in nature? And how does this work? What exactly then are these laws of nature? Because apparently the beings operating in these areas do not prevent us humans from going against nature. Exactly how this works, I would like to explain in the next section. First, a small summary of what we have discussed so far. Now, we first shared the three central principles of Theosophia, or universal wisdom, that of the one boundless life, cyclic manifestation, and the fundamental identity of all life. Secondly, we discussed that from those principles, that nature is an inspirited, living organism, whether we think of that nature as this planet or the solar system, the galaxy or the entire universe with all its visible and invisible planes of existence. This definition holds true, as above, so below. And we have further told that nature is composed of visible and invisible realms, with a passive and active side, and that it works from the inside out, that is, from the inner, invisible, spiritual realms via the mental, invisible realm to the outer, visible planes of existence. So now it's time for a short 3-minute break, and then after that you can ask your questions. See you in a sec.